It's all good. Hi, I'm Robin, as was mentioned, and I'm the Managing Director of Make Real. We're an immersive technology studio based up near the Clock Tower. The business Make Real actually was spun out of another business called Make Media, and the two together were started about 12 years ago, and across those businesses we've done immersive technology, web design and simulators and lots of interesting projects. But today I thought what I'd do, I'm quite passionate, having come from a sort of creative background, and yet in a way always doubted my own creativity. I'm quite passionate about talking today about creative jobs in digital. A large part of it will be from my own perspective. Hopefully a few of the lessons I've learned along the way and a few of the pointers that I've picked up, and I've been fortunate to get some good advice throughout my career. Hopefully I'll be able to share a few of those with you today, and you might find one of them or two of them useful with any luck. So what I thought I'd do first is just briefly talk a little bit about my own personal journey, and that might give you a bit of a sense of the different creative roles I've been through and what was involved in each. Can everyone hear me okay? Because I don't do standing behind pedestals, but I am very loud. You all good? Excellent. Right, so after my degree, so I did a degree, which I haven't put on there handily, in media technology and production in Bradford, and I graduated in 2000. And I loved that degree. We covered everything from radio production, film, TV, animation, 3D modeling, digital music production, and I came out really a tiny bit good at loads of stuff and not particularly good at anything, because we did a lot, but I did love that degree. And so immediately after my degree, even though I had a good degree and I touched on all of these things, it took me 9 months to get my first job. And I was thinking, hang on a minute, I worked hard, I put in all the time, I got first, and all of that kind of stuff, and yet I can't get a job at all. And I'll come on to, this will come on to one of the points I'll make later, but actually I finally was able to get a job in flight simulation, which is a really interesting, was a really interesting industry to work in. So obviously we have Gatwick Airport near us here, so you've got a lot of big aviation companies. You've got L3, you've got Thales, you've got Rockwell Collins. These are all big aviation companies. The buildings all look big and monolithic and engineering from the outside, and they look like the last place you're ever going to find creativity. And yet inside them there is a lot of creativity going on. And actually it was a really good grounding for me. So my job title there was a database design engineer, which again, does not sound very creative at all, and yet it was a creative role. Basically, I was a 3D modeler. I was working on various flight simulators, civil, so passenger planes and so on, and then also things like Lynx rescue helicopter and things like that for the Navy. And what we were doing was we were creating synthetic environments, so seascapes, ships, landscape environments, airports and stuff, but it was a really good foundation in modeling. And I was able to take all of that creative stuff that I got touched upon at university, and there I got some sort of discipline drilled into me in the fact that it really considers itself an engineering company. So that was a real fascinating learning curve for me, that the way they took a very process approach to creativity, which isn't what you necessarily want to do for your whole career, but actually it was a really nice component part of my personal sort of learning journey. Now, I left there because the project I was on for the majority of the time was a 10-year project, and I was 23, and I thought, I'm never going to see the end of this. I think we were 3 years in, and it was 7 years out into the future, and I couldn't cope with the fact that I was probably never likely to actually see the outcome of all the work that was happening. That can't be me, I haven't even gone. Interestingly, I was looking for something else to do because I was really keen to sort of see the start, middle and end of things and actually get some work completed in my career. So I then moved on to make console games. I worked for one of the big independent game studios that was in Brighton, whose remnants still exist in various forms. It was called Climax Racing, and it was it was eventually bought by Disney and became BlackRock, if anyone here knows that. But I worked there for 6 years. And again, it was just an evolution of the flight simulation stuff. So we did a lot of racing games. So I started modeling classic cars, racing cars, so on and so forth, racing environments. But again, a lot of 3D work, a lot of 3D animation. Now this was a completely different type of environment, and yet the role was pretty much the same. So games industry was totally different. I had to wear a suit to work at the flight simulator place, which was very weird. And then all of a sudden, everyone's in t-shirts and shorts, and there's football tables and pool tables, and everyone starts drinking about 4 o'clock on a Friday, which I don't advocate, but that's what happened. But effectively, what was interesting for me was the job wasn't actually that much different. I was still just taking things that existed in real life and recreating them in 3D, or from time to time creating my own concept models and so on and so forth. I did that for 6 years. I'll come on to what I think is a mistake I made in my time in the games industry later on another slide when I'm giving out some tips. But effectively, I left that partly because of burnout, which is another really important thing, especially in creative careers. So at the time in the games industry, you had a lot of what's called crunch, if any of you are sort of familiar with that, which is basically horrendous amounts of hours to get jobs over the line. And the games industry at the time, I was working on kind of brand properties like Hot Wheels, for example. Hot Wheels, the toy cars in America. So every game every year needed to come out for Thanksgiving in the US, which is November the 13th, I think. And to get it out on a disc in November in America, you had to have it finished in August, which meant every summer was spent finishing a game, which meant summer was something I looked at through a window like this. And actually, in 1 year, I did 400 hours of overtime during that job, which is like a fifth of a working year. Incidentally, at Make Real, we have a ban on all overtime unless someone really, really wants to do something, and even then they have to explain to us why they want to do some overtime, which I think is really, really healthy. But that's one of the main reasons I moved on from that. So I then went in and did a little bit of freelance work, but my own anxieties and competitive ego couldn't really cope with that. So pretty soon, I started with a colleague of mine, Ben. We started up Make Media, which has morphed today to Make Real. So originally we did a number of things. We didn't just do immersive technology, we did web design as well. So having done a lot of work in 3D, I then got a chance to have a look at some other disciplines like graphic design, user experience design. And so when I use the word design, sometimes I'm talking about actually creating a visual design, and sometimes I'm just talking about designing interactions and so on and so forth. But that's the kind of journey I've gone down. And actually there's quite a lot of similarities here, right back where I started. But to get there, I've gone through a few different things. So that's just a little bit about me and my creative journey. And just to show you then a little bit about what that looks like, here's some Make Real stuff. So this is our more sort of training and technical end of things that we do.
Here, use these gloves. I think we've seen enough. Now to get up there and realign that microwave dish.
Yes, you really can realign a microwave dish in one of our labs, that is true. But this is all the sort of technical end of the stuff we do as a studio. So immersive technology being a new technology, the consumer market hasn't really developed for it yet. So to keep a studio profitable and make sure that we are there into the future, we do a lot of this kind of technical work. So most of that was sort of VR work, but as you can see, there's a lot of 3D animation in there. There's 3D characters and so on and so forth. But it's mostly technical. Then at the other end of the spectrum, we do stuff, I should point at this really rather than that, that's just a wall. This is the more creative end of things.
How will you be entertaining me today? Loco Dojo!
And That's a virtual reality game that we made, which was a launch title for the Oculus Rift a couple of years ago. But that's an example of the other end of the spectrum of what we do. So that's hopefully a bit about my journey and what we do today. So now what I want to move on to are a few of the things that I've picked up during that journey, which I think hopefully carry a little bit of value in the messages. So there we go. So one of the first things is there is a role for you. There's many creative roles. Which one is right for you? Now, whether you're at the artistic end of the spectrum or the technical end of the spectrum, or you're a specialist or a generalist, there's a role out there for you. One of the things that I didn't realise when I came into it was just how many creative roles there were. I used to think of creativity as artwork, as the ability to draw, as the ability to paint. But actually creativity, I would describe just about everyone who works for us as a creative, whether they're a hardcore technical coder or whether they're an out-and-out concept artist. There's creativity in every role in digital. Creativity is about solving problems, it's about making things work, it's about working with people. Creativity comes in so many forms, it's not just about the core concept or idea. What I would say is, no matter what your personality type is, take the time to understand what you think your strengths are. What are you confident in? What are you less confident in? I would say if you're at the start of your career, you've got a whole career ahead of you to challenge yourself and push yourself. Early in your career, I would go for something you're confident with. Build that confidence early in your career. Go with something you're comfortable with whilst you're learning not just the creativity, but how to operate in the working environment that you're trying to operate in. Because it'll be very different whether it's a games company or whether it's a flight simulation company, as I've mentioned. So take that time to understand yourself and make sure that you are sort of confidently putting yourselves into the positions that are going to work for you. So think about that. Then secondly, know your tools and engines. One of the things that we find often is we get some incredibly talented people coming to us as a smaller business, but they haven't taken the time yet to learn the tools that they need. Now those tools are just that, they're tools. They're not creativity in and of themselves. Creativity is more than just the tools you use. But quite often people come to us and they're not ready yet with regards to the tools of the trade. And for smaller businesses, that's a real challenge. Because if we're looking at it thinking that's going to be 6 months, 9 months or a year to get you up to speed with those tools, that's a pre-investment that's really challenging to make. And also, when you see that, I'm coming on to another point as well, we actually encourage people that are at the start of their careers to try different jobs as well. So again, it's challenging for a small business to think we're going to put the investment in to helping you learn those tools, knowing that in all likelihood, you're probably going to move on in 1 or 2 years. So one barrier you can really remove for employers, so this isn't about your creativity, this is about employment, is just to make sure you really know your tools and make sure you've understood what tools industry is using based on that first point of what is it that I want to do. Now hopefully that should be self-evident for most of you, but it's not always the case. Portfolios really matter. Again, I'm sure that those of you who are doing creative education, this will be drilled into you. But it's not just the visual aspect of the work as well, it's bring it to life for us, bring it to life for us as an employer. My portfolios, I always just tried to find the best pictures I could of what I'd made. And then I asked a couple of people, certainly early on, when I went 9 months without getting a job, what was it about you, was my portfolio not interesting? And they said, well, the visuals were great, but they didn't really tell us anything about you, it didn't tell us what you've done within that work, it didn't tell us about the challenges you had with that work, it didn't tell us about what you did to improve yourself during those projects, and so on. So it's not just about the visuals and other things, it's about really bringing to life what you can do. And often a catch-22 with portfolios is until you get a job, you don't have those commercial projects to show in your portfolio. Don't let that be a barrier to you. If you've spotted somewhere you want to work or the type of role you want to have, go on social media, look at how those companies are talking about those kind of jobs, and then do your own projects that align with those and are similar to those. But make sure you elaborate on your portfolio, give more detail. How long did it take you? That's a really key one that not a lot of people use for it. So this is something I'm showing you. This is what I did within it. These are the problems I had doing it. This is something I had to learn or a challenge I had to overcome to deliver it. And this is how long it took. And don't be afraid to put in the bits that weren't all plain sailing. Because what we want to see as an employer is that you can get over that. We work in immersive technology. Most of the time what we're doing is new. So most projects, our teams, even if they're massively experienced, hit hurdles that they weren't expecting or can't foresee. It's really important that we know that our people are creative enough to get over those hurdles, to find new workflows, find other ways of doing things, and overcome that. See past the job title. This is an interesting one, really. It's really personal experience for me. But as I mentioned earlier, with the flight simulation and games thing, when I was working in flight simulation, my job title was database design engineer. And when I was working in the games industry, my title was artist. And it was the same job. I did the same thing day in and day out. I moved vertices around, I painted materials onto 3D models and so on and so forth. So again, don't just assume that jobs only have one kind of way of describing them. Because for me, that flight simulation work was a great way into the industry. It was a real segue for me. And sometimes, if you say, for example, are a 3D modeler today and you want to get in the games industry, you're going to be up against hundreds of other people looking for those graduate jobs. But there are some other industries and other sectors just around the edges of that, such as training, e-learning, flight simulators, other kinds of industries as well, where the job title might not be the same, but effectively it's that same type of work and it'll help you build up your portfolio. Basically, it was because if you walked into a flight simulation engineering company and mentioned the word artist, they crap themselves around a mile because it's all way too airy-fairy, and vice versa with games. If you call yourself an engineer, they think you're going to write code, not make graphics. So just beware, going down the route of a single sort of job title that you think applies to you. Try different jobs. Again, this is something I mentioned as well. One of the big mistakes I made in the games industry was I never tried anywhere apart from the one games company I worked with. And I assumed that all games companies would be like that, and all games companies weren't. And there were some good things about my games company. I definitely don't want to diss it, but the amount of overtime we did, the amount of crunch we did, and everything else really put me off. And I just thought that was the whole industry. I just didn't think that it would be any different anywhere else. So I never tried anywhere else. And in my opinion, that first decade of your career is the time to try different things. Start with something, as I said, that gives you confidence, that gets you a good start, that makes you feel good about what you're doing. And then build from there. But do try a couple of different things, because you've got a whole career ahead of you. And at different phases of your career, different sorts of opportunities are going to come. But you'll be much better armed to take the opportunities that best suit you if you actually try a few different things. Beware imposter syndrome. Again, this is quite a personal one. I've suffered with this my whole career. So I got a decent degree. Eventually I got a job. I went through a couple of jobs. I started my own business. That business has now run for 12 years. And I still feel like an imposter pretty much today. That's because for me personally, I've always been labelled as a creative, and yet I can't draw. And my graphic design skills are terrible. And I started off thinking that to be a creative or to have this job title of artist meant that you had to be able to do these things. And of course, that's nonsense. Everyone can't be brilliant at everything. You just can't be great at everything. And just because you don't have one specific skill does not mean you're not a creative or you're not an artist or something else. But I really struggled with that, and that was another factor behind me leaving the games industry, because I was sitting next to guys who illustrated 2000 AD and comic books and all this kind of stuff, and they were amazing. A couple of years after I left the industry, the same company I used to work for started a new role called technical artist. That would have been perfect for me, because I love to recreate things. You show me something and say recreate that in the computer and I can make it perfect. If you say make that up from scratch, I struggle a bit more. And I used to think that meant really I was a fake. And I should be nice to myself now and say, I don't want to big myself up, but I'm probably not a fake, otherwise someone would have found out by now, because it's been 20 years. But that's a really important thing. It's something I'm massively passionate about, is, don't do yourself down. To be creative doesn't mean you have to have set skills or anything like that. Creativity comes in many, many forms. In asking any questions, I also wanted to make the point that don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to seek out mentors. If someone rebuffs you or looks down at you because of the question you've asked them, then at least you've learned that that's probably someone you don't want to work with in the future anyway. What people should be doing is supporting you, giving you good feedback, even if the feedback isn't what you expect to hear. It's our job as an industry to make sure that the next generation of talent coming through is excellent, right? That's our responsibility, that's our role as business leaders, is to make sure that you guys get an opportunity, because you are the creatives of tomorrow. You're the people who are going to be doing those projects tomorrow. And so it's really important. So don't be afraid to ask questions. The worst that can happen is, or just seek out mentors or ask people to help you through it. The worst thing that can happen is that someone rebuffs you or treats you poorly. But that's no bad thing. And the ones that don't, the ones that mentor you and help you, you'll get a lot out of. So there would be just a few of the sort of tips and stuff from my sort of journey. Does anybody have any questions?